Peril by Bienia, presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Join me. Chapter 1. A shadow shifted to my right. I tightened my grip on my shoulder bag and peered into the darkness. A red pinprick of light glowed for a second, then snuffed out. I caught a whiff of cigarette smoke, different from the tobacco odor back home, yet recognizable all the same. I should have never got out of the taxi at the top of the street. I should have never left the airport. My heart raced. A car horn blared off in the distance, and then silence. I took a deep breath and continued on, my senses on high alert. My suitcase wheels rattled behind me, cutting the silence. My flight from Calgary had been 2 hours late leaving, and I had scrambled to make my connecting flight in London. It was going on midnight when I arrived in Istanbul. My best friend, Gabriella Rizzo, said she'd be at the airport waiting for me. Except she wasn't. Gab wasn't the most punctual person I knew, so I had waited patiently, expecting to see a 5'3" curvaceous bundle of energy with a blazing smile and emerald green eyes bouncing toward me at any moment. After a while, I began to wonder if we had screwed up the time difference and miscalculated our meeting time. It wouldn't be the first time. While I waited, I had scrolled through my old messages from her. Hey, Georgia, it's all set up. All you have to do is get your adorable ass on that plane. And when I had confirmed I had booked my flight, yay, we're going to have so much fun. Can't wait to see you. I'll be at the airport waiting. The message ended with 5 emoji kissy faces. I had waited as waves of arriving passengers picked up their luggage and dispersed, leaving a few stragglers like me behind. I told myself Gab must have gotten caught in a traffic snarl on the way to the airport, or that the car she was traveling in had broken down. Except it didn't explain why she hadn't replied to the message I sent her before I got on the plane in Calgary, or the 5 texts and 2 emails I had sent since. 2 hours after arriving, I knew something was wrong. Tucking a strand of stick-straight dark hair behind my ear, I paused to check my phone. The map I had downloaded at the airport showed that I was in Bienia, a district of Istanbul, somewhere between Taksim Square and Kabatis. The directions indicated that I should turn left. That street is even darker and narrower than the one I was on. I glanced behind me and moved on. Buildings on both sides of the street blocked out any light, a mugger's paradise if I'd ever seen one, and I'd seen a few. I knew that my job as a private investigator made me more wary than most. Just the same, I'd rather not become a mugging statistic on the first day of my vacation. I shivered and pulled my coat tighter, bunching the fabric close to my chest to keep out the cold March air. The yellow glow of a single light pulled me forward. What if the guest house wasn't open this time of night? I swallowed hard. What if something bad had happened to Gab? Chapter 2. The Golden Sky guest house didn't look quite as stately as it did on their website. The front door sagged and the whole place needed several coats of paint. I reached for the door handle and heaved a sigh of relief when it turned in my hand. My suitcase bumped loudly as I pulled it through the doorway. The only light came from the glow of a small TV screen, the sound turned down to an imperceptible level. A narrow wooden counter divided the space, which was hardly bigger than a cloakroom. A figure lying slumped behind the counter jerked awake and leaped to his feet. Welcome to the Golden Sky Guest House. He gave his shirt hem a few tugs and brushed back a lock of dark hair from his forehead. How may I assist you? He was all of 15 or 16. A hawkish nose and big brown eyes dominated his thin face. His English was heavily accented but excellent. I'm glad you're open, I managed a shaky laugh. I have a reservation. My name is Jorja Knight. I spelled it out for him. One moment, please. He peered at an ancient computer screen to his right. After a few moments of silence, I added, or it might be under my friend's name, Gabriella Rizzo. Ezo, he muttered. Yes, it is here. Has my friend already checked in? He pulled over a leather-bound register and ran his finger down the page, and then up the other side. Yes, Madame Rizzo is here. I breathed out and lowered my shoulders, which were scrunched up around my ears. I handed over my passport and signed the register while the young man jotted down the information he needed. He slid my passport back across the counter along with an old-fashioned key. Our very best room, number 7, third floor. He gave me a toothy grin. My eyes searched for an exit. Stairs here, madam. He swept aside a dark red curtain as if he were showing me a curved marble staircase to the grand ballroom. I hiked the strap of my carry-all higher onto my shoulder and picked up my suitcase. After traveling all day and then some, the suitcase felt heavier than ever. Each step creaked loudly as I climbed, reaching the landing on the 3rd level. I paused. A dimly lit hallway stretched out in 2 directions. I chose the shortest hall and located number 7. The doorknob wobbled loosely in my hand when I inserted the key. Very best room, my ass. Gab, are you here? My hands fumbled on the wall for a light switch, and a single bulb cast a yellowish glow over the room. A suitcase lay open on the floor at the foot of one of the twin beds, and another smaller case on top. Clothes spilled out from both. Gab, I checked the luggage tags. Gab's name, written in purple ink, was clearly visible on both. I massaged the back of my neck. Could we have missed each other en route? Maybe she went out thinking she had plenty of time to explore the streets of Istanbul before heading to the airport and had gotten sidetracked somewhere. Why hadn't she replied to my text I'd sent her at the airport? I checked my phone again. No message. The knot in my stomach tightened. This wasn't like Gab at all. Sure, she was prone to being late, but not by 3 hours, and certainly not without letting me know she'd been held up somewhere. A floorboard creaked in the hall outside my door. Gab? A spark of elation shot through me as I moved toward the door. The footsteps stopped, but someone remained, just outside. Gab, is that you? I whispered loudly, aware of the early morning hour. I held my breath and waited for the sound of a key being inserted or the door across the hall opening. But there was none. Fighting the urge to yank open the door, I waited in silence, gripped with uncertainty. The door handle turned slowly and then turned back. It's not Gab. Who's there? I asked louder, the sound of my own heart pounding in my ears. After what seemed like an eternity, I heard a creak, then another, as footsteps moved away. Chapter 3. I bolted upright. The room was still dark, and it took me a second to remember where I was. I must have finally dozed off for a few minutes. The other bed remained empty. I reached for my phone. No messages, no texts, no emails. Anxious for the day to start, and yet dreading it at the same time, I shoved off the thin blanket I had pulled over my clothes, crawled out of bed, and peered out the window. Pushing aside the gauze curtains, I stared into the darkness as a growing streak of pale pink light split the eastern sky, breathing deeply to quell my rising panic. Come on, Gab, where are you? Gab and I met at university over 20 years ago and had been best friends since. We were different in many respects, but similar in the ways that counted, yin to yang. Although Gab's shorter frame was more curvaceous than my more athletic 5'8" one, it wasn't our biggest difference. Gab wore her zest for life on her sleeve, and unlike my more studied way of making decisions, Gab jumped headlong into new situations, trusting that the universe would reward her spontaneity. Last year, Gab put a pause on her catering business after being accepted into a 10-month-long culinary program at Le Cordon Bleu in Paris. After finishing the program, she decided to take time off to travel, a gap year like the one she'd never had. She'd been begging me to come join her for months. I had just wrapped up my latest investigation, and with nothing major scheduled on the books, I agreed to meet up with her. In Istanbul. It took my fuzzy brain a minute to identify the faint melodic rise and fall of distant voices. First call to morning prayer. Another dawn, another day. I listened until the hauntingly beautiful sound faded away. I rubbed my arms against the cool air and glanced at the door. I should give thanks for surviving the night. I would have preferred to stay in one of the modern hotels lining the Bosporus instead of Istanbul's version of the Bates Motel, but Gab insisted we experience as much authentic life in Istanbul as possible and had booked us into this great house. I got it. After paying for her 10-month-long stint in Paris, the guest house was a whole lot cheaper. I climbed off the bed and made my way to the postage-sized bathroom. Cranking open the taps, I cringed as the pipes banged and creaked before spitting out a small stream of tepid water. I pushed aside the curtain and stepped into the shower. The water did little to displace the gnawing worry that chilled me. Shivering, I wrapped myself with a threadbare towel hanging next to the door and rushed back into the bedroom and got dressed. I'd give anything right now to see Gab walk in the door, laughing, apologizing, saying she had met the most fabulous man and spent the night with him. Except I knew Gab would never do that. Not the meet a fabulous guy and spend the night with him part, but she would never blow off a friend. Finding no hairdryer, I rubbed my stick's straight shoulder-length dark hair with the now damp towel and finger fluffed it into place. I slapped concealer. Excuse me. I slapped concealer on the dark circles under my eyes and swiped lip gloss across my lips. By the time daylight filtered into the room, I was already dressed. The whole process expedited by the frigid room temperature and the fact that I was antsy and needed to do something. Anything. I turned at the door for one last glance around the room. Something was off. My eyes took to the clothes spilling out of Gab's unzipped suitcase. Gab always rolled her clothes when she packed, her not-so-secret tip for keeping them wrinkle-free. I walked back and flipped open the lid. The clothes had been rolled at one point, but someone had lifted them and hurriedly shoved them back in. Had someone rifled through Gab's suitcase, or had she simply been in a hurry? Although to flip the lid of a suitcase shut, about to flip the lid of the suitcase shut, something caught my eye. Bending closer, I lifted a corner of the suitcase lining and pulled it away. It wasn't frayed or torn. It had been cut.